with peace, and contentment is better than plenty with strife. I imagine I've said this many times over the course of the studies in Proverbs, but it's a truth. If it could ever get anchored in your soul, it will help you with everyday life. And that is that everything isn't just like it appears to be. That's one of my famous sayings. Somebody came to me this week, was telling me about an incident of a fellow who had lost his job at Myers. And that there was another fellow that lost his job who was a fellow in a wheelchair. And when they told him that he was no longer needed, he got so upset that he vomited. And I said, I don't believe that a bit. And they said, Brother Green. I said, I don't believe that a bit. That, not that he vomited, but she said they laughed at him for being so upset about losing his job. I said, I don't believe that. I can't believe that anybody would be that inhumane to laugh at somebody who was going through such a difficult time as that. Now, they may have chuckled about something else, but I don't believe that. You say, Brother Green, this lady's a good lady, and she's not a liar or nothing of that nature. But she heard this from somebody else. And people exaggerate, people reconstruct things to make them sound just like they want it to sound. And this lady said, I'll probably never go back to Myers and buy anything again. Now see, that's the results of somebody saying something. I'm telling you, everything isn't just like it appears to be. In the book of Proverbs, so far, in chapter 3 and verse 14, it says that wisdom is better than gold. And in that same verse, it says wisdom is better than silver. And in the 18th verse of that 3rd chapter, it said wisdom is better than rubies. And in chapter 12 and verse 9, it says that a despised man is better than one who honors himself. The reason I stuttered there, I couldn't read my writing. But it says that a despised man is better than one that honors himself. You'll hear a lot of that in these next few months, these politicians who honor themselves, and you don't have to believe hardly a word that they're saying. I told you about that busload of politicians that in a bus, they hit a tree out in the country, and when it did, it splattered them all over the acre there, and the farmer heard the crash. He came down there with his front loader on his tractor and buried all of them. But when the sheriff came along, he said, where are the victims of this accident? Well, he said, I buried them all. He said, were they all dead? He said, well, some of them said they wasn't, but you know how those politicians lie. That's just about the way it is, too. You've got this honor themselves, but he said a despised man is better. And in chapter 15 and verse 16 it says a little with the fear of God is better than treasures with trouble. See, he's comparing. There's some things it doesn't look like it, but it is better. And he said in chapter 15 verse 17, a dinner of herbs with love is better than a feast with hatred. And then he went on to say in chapter 16 verse 32, a man slow to anger is better than a hot-tempered mighty man. And there is a lot of things. A man who ruleth his spirit is better than an intemperate hero in 1632. Chapter 17 verse 1, where our text is right now, a morsel of bread with quietness is better than a feast with strife. And an honest poor man is better than a fool with perverse lips, chapter 19, verse 1. A poor man is better than a liar, chapter 19, verse 22. Better to dwell alone in a small place than with a large woman, with a large one, than in a large place with a brawling woman. I guess it would be just about, wouldn't matter whether she's big or small, would it? You know, it's interesting about that verse. You know, one of those verses, I think it might be 21:9 or 25:24. There's a couple of places where that's mentioned. It said it's better to dwell upon the housetop than in a house with a brawling woman. It would be hard for you to conceive in the United States somebody living on the roof, but people do live on the roof in Israel, and people sleep up there and live up there somewhat. It's all flat roofs home. There's no steep roof homes there. Well, there may be some, but basically they're all flat roof homes. People live up there. You remember the Rahab? She hid those fellows up on the roof under the flags. And people live like that. That's the way they live. But anyway, I don't know what would it be like to live with a brawling woman, but there are some women that are just about as dangerous as a man who, a woman knows how to throw her fist and throw her weight, and she could be kind of dangerous. I told the other day about that fella kept coming home drunk, and his wife would beat him up every night. Come home 2 o'clock one morning, had a duck under his arm, and when she opened the door, he said, "See my pig?" And she said, "You're so drunk you can't tell a duck from a pig." He said, "Shut up, woman, I was talking to my duck." Some women can be kind of hard to live with. Notice what it says in verse 19 of chapter 21. Better to dwell in the wilderness than with an angry, contentious woman. And in 27:5, open rebuke is better than secret love. And chapter 27, verse 10, better is a neighbor near than a brother far off. And then chapter 28, verse 6, a righteous poor man is better than a wicked rich man. And the reason I went through all of that is that the philosophy that's taught in these character building lessons of Proverbs is there are a lot of things that are better than other things. We value silver and gold, but really there are some things far more important and more valuable than that. He said, better is a dry morsel with quietness therewith than a house full of sacrifices with strife. So poverty with peace and contentment is better than with plenty. But if you had riches and you had strife, you know, God is not the author of confusion. The devil is. And Paul talked about that vain jangling. That's empty arguments, just constant jangling. And I'm not putting anybody down, or I'm not trying to open a can of worms here tonight. But if that goes on in your house, you're not very smart. You don't have to live like that with arguing and quarreling and bickering. You're never going to get anywhere with God. You're here in this class to learn how to be a spiritual leader. You're not going to lead anything. You're not even going to lead yourself if you can't get along with people that you live with, that you work with, that you associate with. If they're jangling people, just consider that many words usually means little sense. I mean, if a guy's talking all the time and always caught in trouble, he's weak-minded. He's not worth hearing at all. Paul taught Timothy, he said, study to be quiet and do your own business. Study to be quiet. Learn how to be quiet. I don't know if any of you are blustery or mouthy or have wall-to-wall mouth. You've been around people like that. It's better for you if you just learn how to be quiet. That you might, Paul said, that you might lead a quiet and peaceful life in all godliness and all honesty. Isaiah said that in quietness and in confidence shall be your peace and your strength. The world's all filled with confusion, but the Christian's life ought to be a life of peace. And we're not going to have peace all the time. We're not going to have perfect harmony all the time with our loved ones and church relationships and all. But surely you don't have to live like that all of the time. And if you could, just get away from it entirely. I don't really, I'm telling the truth, I don't really understand how people can get up in the morning and turn that radio on and listen to that damnable rock music all day long. It would drive me right up the wall. And it's just nothing but hellish foolishness. That's all it is hellish foolishness. Some people go turn the television on, turn it on in the morning, leave it on all day long. Whew! I couldn't live like that. I tell you, why don't you, if you're going to be a man of God or a lady of the Lord where you try to do something for God, try to live a life of peace and quiet. You say, well, I just got to have something going on all the time. There's something wrong with you. If you have to have something entertain you besides God, you're a screwball and a nincompoop. You got to have some racket going all the time. Your heart is not set in peace. you can't really face reality because you don't want to think too much, or you would shut that damnable radio and television off, or record player, or whatever else. You see these jerks going around here with these things in their ears, and they're what kind of a life is that? I mean, it's a dumb, stupid life. If I could have my way, I'd crawl alongside some little brook somewhere out in the wilderness, get alone with God, and be quiet and just peaceful with God. I remember in my first church I had was up in the forest, up around West Branch. And oh, many times I'd drive back up in those fire lanes where there would be nobody within 100 miles, seemed like. And just get out and shout and cry and pray. I was there all alone. That's what I don't understand. I don't understand people. Some of you are that way. I know you are, that you just got to have that damnable foolishness going on all of the time in your heads. Let me go on to the second verse. A wise servant shall have rule over a son that causes shame, and shall have part of the inheritance among the brethren. He's talking here that a wise servant is better than a son that is full of mischief. He's talking about being a good worker, a good, wise servant, and to be loyal to your boss. And you'll be surprised the benefits. As this verse claims, they get more benefits from that man who is a servant, will get more benefits than a son who is wicked, wrong. I tell you, I don't know how many of you are in the workplace every day, but it would be a wonderful thing if you could go to work and be there on time every day. Not just once in a while, but every day on time. Or perhaps just a few minutes early, so that those in charge would not have to worry about it. Or when you punch the time clock, you'd know that you're in work where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to be there. And to be willing to give a good day's work when you are there. And you'd be willing to work overtime if the boss would care to ask you to do so. And you'd cooperate with the other workers that were around you and be courteous to others as well as to the boss with yes sir and no sir, and not complain about whatever is going on there. I am not a union man. And I don't care anything about labor unions. And somebody who's watching this on the video, I'm sorry if you're a labor person, because I have no respect for that kind of business. And they have made men lazy. And they have protected people that need to get fired. And many times people that are trying to do good have to work extra hard for screwballs that you work alongside it, because they don't do their job, you have to do theirs too. And it'd be good if you could not ask for days off. You know, if you want to have fun, I want today off because I want to go snowmobiling. No, don't do that. And it's when you get ready to really need a day off for something important, you'd be more likely to get it if you're not asking for something foolishness all the time. I'm just trying to tell you what it is like. A wise servant shall rule over a son. He'll have more respect than even a child if you do right by your boss. Chapter 14, verse 35, the king's favor is toward a wise servant, but his wrath is against him that causes shame. Proverbs 10:5, he that gathereth in summer is a wise son, but he that sleepeth in harvest is a son that causes shame, a lazy son. A wise servant will even gain more respect than a wicked son. That doesn't sound just exactly right, perhaps, but it's a proven thing. I'll give you 2 or 3 examples, and I don't want to make a lot out of it, but you know, Daniel in the Bible he was brought into favor and tender love with the prince of Babylon. He became very popular. He was a slave, and yet he rose above his slavery to become a leader, and even became prime minister of the whole land of Egypt while he was a slave. Well, he did that because he had that tenderness about him, that love and concern and caution and care and concern for people. I don't know. I'm honest. I don't know if you can change or not. If you're messed up, you're probably messed up for life. I was on that path. I changed my life 49 years ago. I told you 100 times. But God's not going to change you unless you want to get changed. If you're a troublemaker and a gossiper and a problem and a difficulty and you can't seem to get around and get your life in order and surrender and consecrate and dedicate and separate, live pure and holy and godly, there's something cockeyed about you. And here is an old man trying to get you straightened out. But I can't do it. Only God can do that. But he has to have a willing worker. Somebody that, like you, that'll say, Lord, I realize I am a mess. My mind is not submissive. My heart is not submissive to you, and I want it to be. God will give you some guidance. He'll work with you if you let him. He'll work with you. But you got to let him work with you. It was said about David, he was just a young fella, but it was said that he behaved himself wisely. He went from a shepherd's tent to the king's palace. And he did it all because he behaved himself wisely. He wasn't getting into trouble, and he wasn't making trouble for anybody else. He was accepted in the sight of all the people of Israel from Dan to Beersheba. You say, what are you talking about? Well, when you behave yourself wisely, people are going to respect you. And like King Saul, he even feared David. I mean, he was the king, but he feared David. He was filled with humility. So the king thought, well, I'm going to get rid of this guy. And so he said, I'll have him marry my daughter. Probably his daughter was a hellion. I'm not sure. She turned out to be quite a mess later on. So he said, I'll have him marry my daughter, and that'll fix him, take care of him. If you got a daughter like that if somebody married it, it'll wreck their life. Now that's just about what he thought would happen. But it was said that about David, when it was propositioned to him to marry the king, he said, who am I that I should be married to the king's daughter? I don't have any money to pay for a dowry. And the proposition was made, and he did marry that girl. And it said that he behaved himself more wisely than all of the servants of Saul, and his name was much said about. He had a great testimony and a great reputation. this is for all of us. Paul said, let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believer in word, in conversation, in charity, in spirit, and in faith. It was said in the Proverbs that a good name is better. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor than silver and gold. Again, everything isn't just like it appears to be. Some things are better. And it would be better to have a good name. Joseph down there in Egypt, he was a goodly person, a well-favored person. He was good looking. Evidently he was a good looker. Potiphar's wife was enamored by his looks and his stature. And he was so nice and so polite, so kind. I want to tell you, fellas, I don't know if you've got any brains to figure out this or not, but if you're sweet and kind and nice to these women, I tell you what'll happen. They'll eat right out of the palm of your hand. You get ugly and cross and criticize them and argue and bicker with them, they'll leave you alone. But you be nice and kind and sweet and loving and thoughtful. I don't have any problem with a woman. She's on the defensive most of the time. When you're yelling and screaming, she's a weaker person. She wouldn't know how to fight back. So many times she shuts her mouth. Sometimes she pouts. Because she doesn't know any other way to do it but just shut up. But anyway, I'm trying to tell you that just try it. I mean, just try showing some kindness. It'll be a lot better than all that dwelling on the housetop all by yourself than it would be in a house with some woman that are cussing and damning and swearing and throwing rolling pins at you anyway. And then, let me read this next verse. Verse 3. The fining pot is for silver, and the furnace for gold, but the Lord trieth the hearts. He's talking about just like silver and gold are purified by fire, so the Lord purifies us in our hearts by fiery trials. Would you listen to this old man? I believe I have some insight. I believe I have some light on this sort of thing. James chapter 1 and verse 2 says, Brethren, count it all joy when you fall into divers temptations. Blessed is the man that endureth temptation, for when he is tried, he shall receive the crown of life, which the Lord promised to them that love him. Now, there's the illustration here is a fining pot. That's the chapter 17, verse 3. The fining pot is for silver, and the furnace for gold, but the Lord tries the hearts. I don't know. I've never been in a place where they refine gold or silver. But I read about such places. And at least in ancient times, they would put fire underneath the ore, the silver ore. And the hot, fiery fire would heat this pot and melt the silver. And the hotter the fire, the more this dross that is lighter than the silver would come to the top of that boiling pot, and they would skim that hot dross off the top and throw it in a heap. Then turn the heat up more, and more dross would come up from that metal, and they'd skim that dross off, throw it in the heap, turn the heat up higher and higher and higher, and the higher the heat, the more the dross that's, you know what I mean by dross? The junk that's in there would come to the top. And they knew when their silver was pure, when they could look into the pot and see the reflection of their face in the pot, like a mirror. And someone has well said, that's the way the Lord tries us. He turns up the heat in our lives and brings up out of that trash out of our life the dross, and until he can see his own face in our life. And it isn't always an easy sort of a thing. I guess most of you are old enough to know that life is not a bowl of cherries. There are a lot of pits. And it always doesn't have happy endings like the movies or like the book that you read, and they all lived happily ever after. It doesn't work out that way. And the Bible said, through much tribulation we shall enter into the kingdom. Would you believe it, that everybody isn't going to like you? They're not. They're not. You might think they will. Oh boy, I'm just, no, there'll be people that'll hate you. As precious as Donna Gunning is, there are people that hate Donna. Wouldn't you think so?
Sure is.
It's not that she wants them to hate her, but because she wants to live for God and serve the Lord. There'll be people that will put that in their mind as some kind of an agitation and would not care to be around Donna because she loves the Lord. But anyway, you're going to have enemies. And even as wonderful as Jesus was, he had enemies. Did he not have enemies? Sure he did. And as much as you don't want it, God's going to try you. If you're really who you are and want to be something, there'll be some sickness in your life. There'll be some pain. There'll be some sorrow. There'll be some tears and tribulation. There'll be some trials. There'll be some trauma and perplexing situations that will come. But it's basically the Lord to see what you are made out of. And if you're really all that you would like to be, you'll go through the trials and fires that God may prove you. You know what a lot of people do, Matthew? They quit God. They quit God. Well, if that's the way it is, I'm out. Well, you're lost. You could have stuck with this thing, and God would have purified you and made you worth something. But you got tired of it. You couldn't take it. So you're just like the rest of the scumbolians of this world. Cast you aside. Understand? Takes grit in your craw and sand in your pants to go through whatever you have to go through. I've used this illustration lots of times. Here's a concert pianist, beautiful, playing concertos, B-flat minor, and Bach and Chopin, just beautiful. And a fellow steps up to the piano after the concert and says, "Boy, I wish I could play the piano like that." And he say, "Oh, no, you don't." "Oh, yes, I do. I want to play like that." Oh, so, "Oh, no, you don't. No, you don't." "Well, what do you mean by why I don't?" Well, he said, ever since I was a little boy, maybe 5, 6 years old, when I started to read music. And I started to practice. And I can look out the window and kids will be playing basketball and football and baseball, riding their bicycle, roller skating up and down the sidewalk. I was practice, 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 practice. All my life it's been this all my life. And surely I might be able to do this now, and you say, oh, I'd like to do that. But you would not like to pay the price that I have paid so I can play like this. You say, oh, I'd like to be a wonderful, spirit-filled, godly Christian. No, you don't. You don't want to pay that kind of a price. If it come easy, if you could buy it in a can and open it with a can opener, if you could buy it for 50 cents at the drugstore, you might do it. But to have to pay a price for it, you're not going to pay that price. Mm-mm. No, you're not. Because you don't really want it that bad. Can you understand what I'm talking about a little bit? That's what he's saying in our text. The fining pot is for silver, and the furnace for gold, but the Lord trieth the hearts. And he does it by putting us through the fire. See what kind of grit we've got, whether we can handle it or not. If you don't, you don't. I don't mean to preach, but it's so easy to preach when you've got some good text like this to preach. Notice verse 4. A wicked doer giveth heed to false lips, and a liar giveth ear to a naughty tongue. There's two great sins. The sin of deceit and the sin of lying. The sin of deceit is having a false lips. The sin of lying is having a naughty tongue. A wicked doer giveth heed to false lips. False lips are not to be trusted. False lips are not true lips. Deceit and cheat and counterfeit and deception and fakery and flim-flam and fraud and gyp and phony baloney and sham and swindle make people believe something that really isn't the way it is. I went with Sarah, my granddaughter, today. She's been kind of looking for a house, to buy a house. And I talked to the realtor. I said, this girl is pure and holy and godly. One of the finest girls I've ever known in my life. Don't slick her. Don't cheat her. I don't know what he thought about it, but I know how crooked that some of those people can be. Lie and cheat, tell all kinds of things. I mean, you go to these car salesmen, and every one of those cars they sell was owned by a little old lady that didn't drive it hardly at all. That's the way they do. They lie. So this deceitful, they